Cheney, teaching professional, Rob? That be would that be the
Thank you,
right
Rob.
title, teaching professional?
Yeah, I think that's
Okay,
my
okay,
main
yeah,
that's my main gig. I have a few different things I do, but teaching golf would be at the top
yeah.
of
That
that
would
list,
be
I
like
think.
your main role in life right now. For now. Okay, good.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. It's really been everything I've always done, really, for
Okay, so
a
why
long
don't
time
you
now.
give us some background on your trajectory? How did you get to where you are now, where you started, etc.?
I think I think from speaking to other professionals, my trajectory was quite commonplace. I was a decent young junior golfer at my club in the UK. I grew up in the south of England and played junior golf, got down to a sort of scratch handicap around 17, 18 years old, and only had desires at that time to play golf professionally, thinking that I was good enough. And, once I'd left school, I did the whole PGA thing and uh, worked at a golf club and then tried to make it on tour, the local tours or the regional tours in the UK to begin with, some open qualifying, those kind of mini tours that most people would be familiar with now. Spent a couple of years spending a lot more money than I made and realizing after, not too long of a time that I need to do something about this because this isn't really going to be sustainable. And then I think a lot of people's path when they don't make it as a player is they can quite easily fall into coaching because it's the most sort of next natural thing to do as a golf professional. And to be fair, you can charge, pretty good money for it, even if you're not very good at it, just because you're a good player. And so that's kind of what I did. I got a teaching job and I don't think I was very good at it to begin with. And so that sent me down a path of, wanting to understand the swing more. I was really just sharing a little bit of what I'd learned with the PGA, which I don't think was particularly sort of comprehensive. And what I'd learned as a player, sharing some of my insights that I might have used as a player. But I saw in my results fairly quickly that wasn't really good enough. And so the curiosity sort of within me was like, I need to do better than this. And if I'm going to do this for any length of time, I'd like to figure out how this really works. And that led me down the road of almost by accident, actually, bumping into meeting a guy called James Ridyard, who some of your viewers and listeners may be familiar with. James happened to be close to me geographically in the UK. We were in the same part of the country. James was one of the first people to work for TrackMan when it first came to Europe. And he was also one of the first people to get on board with Andy Plummer and Mike Bennett and Stack and Tilt. And what James would do was would bring these guys, bring Andy and Mike across to the UK. He was quite at the forefront of that, really, that movement in the early 2000s, late 2000s, I suppose, mid to late 2000s. And it was by chance that James was practicing on the driving range that I was teaching at with an orange box, one of the first TrackMan units. And I was curious. I'd seen some of James's interactions at that time. I was using Twitter quite a lot, learning from a few different people online and noticing that there were a few voices in this space that were louder than others. And James's was one of them for sure. And I was curious to learn more about Stack and Tilt. And it was that interaction with James that really got me into an introduction to Mike and Andy. And from there, the last 15 years has been a continuation of that journey, really understanding more about the system, developing my knowledge on the swing, anatomy, and just becoming, hopefully a better coach, a better problem solver, and just helping golfers really, which has really been the driving force from the beginning. I love helping people. I think if you coach the game, and that's at the core of what you do, hopefully, and then you want to be as good at it as you can be, and so that requires you keep questioning what you do and looking for answers where you don't already have them. So that's really what we've done. I've been teaching now for more than 25 years, I suppose, and it's taken me all over the world. I lived in Portugal for a number of years. I've been in Singapore recently, now back in London. So that's kind of the story up to
Oh,
present
that's
day, I
cool.
suppose.
Yeah. So back, I guess, back when you met Mr. Ridyard, James was one of the ball flight laws, deep plane guys, and I
Yeah, that's
think
right.
him and John Graham were supposed to make a video. Well, this is how far back my blog goes. So Graham and
Yeah, I've certainly heard and seen your logo like over the years. Yeah, it's on my radar, so I'm
so
familiar with it.
yeah, James, but now he's a wedge wizard, right?
That's right. He's developed his own. In fact, there's a true story. I mean, when I first met him, and within a month or so of working with him, we did some clinics together, which he sort of drove, and I was learning from him. I remember developing a friendship with him, and he shared with me at the time that he had this entire kind of knowledge and sort of a database of short game stuff that he really wanted to do. That was right back in the late 2008, 2009, 2010, that kind of time. So 15 plus years ago, he was already thinking about being that short game guy, and he's done a good job from what I can see.
World renowned for his
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's done a
yeah,
wonderful job. Yeah, he's an impressive guy, and he's a very knowledgeable coach. You know, having spent a lot of time with him, his knowledge of ball flight, anatomy, and how the whole thing fits together is really what helped me to develop the framework from which I still use today, to be honest with you.
absolutely. Yeah, so he's embroiled with another stack and tilt guy, a friend of mine. Originally a stack and tilt guy, uh, Joe Mayo.
Oh
Angle
yeah,
of
yeah,
attack
yeah.
and all this stuff, and it's interesting to watch
That's right.
because you learn something. You always learn something from these debates, and they're both pretty knowledgeable guys, and
Yeah,
you know
yeah. I
really
think
boils
so.
down
I think
to
so.
what your preference is. You know what I mean? So yeah, I started watching, noticing you on YouTube. I mean, I think you've got really got an eloquent voice, and you communicate effectively, which is probably the key to keeping people interested, because it kind of makes sense, and there's nothing sensational about watching your stuff. I actually enjoy it. Not that I've had, just by coincidence, the last, I think, 4 or 5 guys I've interviewed are stack and tilt, from the stack and tilt camp. Not necessarily because I see it as a fundamentals more so than because there was a time when it just so happens that the next guy is my good friend Nick Clearwater. He's coming from the same.
Yeah, Nick's a good friend of mine.
Right.
Nick's a good friend of mine. It's you know, there's a coincidence to that, you could say, but there's also an inevitability to it as well. I mean, the fingerprints of stack and tilt are everywhere if you really pay attention, and it's only a matter of time before people either realize that, or it's just the the momentum of all the people that have been influenced by it will create that fact that you say I've had 4 or 5 of the last 4 or 5 guys have been that way. I think that's just there's an inevitability about it. Uh, there's arguments going on all the time about whether stack and tilt is this or it's that, and some people are like, I don't subscribe to it. As soon as somebody says that, you know that they haven't really studied it enough to know what it is. It, it it often gets completely unfairly portrayed as one swing, and the concept that everybody who teaches stack and tilt is teaching everybody to swing the same, which is clearly not true when you look at the students. And Mike and Andy made a DVD set more than 10, 12 years ago now, which included 10 PGA Tour players at the time that they were working with. So actual elite golfers, PGA Tour winners, demonstrating the system, but all swinging differently. Pressure plates at the time, 3D graphs, TrackMan. There's nobody else has created or published anything like that. Not even close. Not even close. So the fingerprints are everywhere because it's exceptionally good information. And there's a camp out there who want to try to discredit it, which is fine. It's a competitive industry. People are going to try and stake their claim and say that, you know, my stuff's better than your stuff. But it's really just a straw man argument, because at the end of the day, stack and tilt is a comprehensive system which actually, because it has a model swing to work from, allows you to teach everybody, which is ironically the flag or the badge that all these other coaches tend to wear, which is, well, I don't subscribe to a system, I don't subscribe to a model, because everyone's different. I mean, the idea that there's no rules because everybody's different is, take a step back and think about that for a second. It's nonsensical. Systems and models are everywhere in the world. They help us organize our thoughts, make sense of information. And for any coach to say that they don't have a model is naive at best and disingenuous at worst, because if you didn't have a model, you'd never be able to make a recommendation to the player in front of you about what to do, because you wouldn't have a sense of where the swing was deficient if you didn't have a model in your head of how the swing was supposed to function. But what's happened in my mind is that the golf has been, I think, quite still to this day, even quite poorly communicated. Golf instruction as a whole, I think the industry is still quite fragmented. So there isn't a consensus on what should happen, what does happen. And because of that, people wear this badge of, I don't have a system, I don't have a model, I teach the golfer in front of me, like it's some sort of medal. And I would say it's the complete opposite. I'd say those are the people who get battered around in the wind like a paper bag. They change their mind from week to week, from month to month. And the internet keeps receipts now. You can go back on somebody's story, and if you care to, and I haven't got the time to do it, but if you care to, you can scroll back through and see how 6 months ago this person was telling someone to move their left shoulder down in the backswing to keep a centered pivot, which is a preference of mine, but it's not the only way to swing. But that's what they were teaching. They were teaching this centered pivot with no sway. And then 6 months later, because the wind changed, they're teaching the shoulder to move across now. And because there's no system, nobody's written their model down on a piece of paper. People hide behind the fact that it's okay, everyone's different. We can kind of just do what we want, swing your swing, all of that noise. And then it's just, I think it's the people who get hurt the most. I couldn't care less. I'm completely okay with my preferences. I'm very clear about what they are. Not everybody I teach has the same swing by any stretch of the imagination. But I think the people who really don't do poorly out of this are the golfing public, because the message is still so conflicting and they don't know where to look. And of course, I'd have a bias towards my YouTube channel as being reasonably well organized and some good information. But that's not to say it's the only one you could watch and get better, but there's an awful lot you could watch and get worse.
And I think that what the advent of the internet has brought us is a need to create content. Okay. Notoriety. Any publicity is good publicity. So if you ask Roy Cohn or Donald Trump or these guys, and as long as it's newsworthy, it's palatable or controversial, or it gets looks. It doesn't.
I completely agree.
So a lot of times, so for example, I'm going back to when the stack and tilt first start. They were the swing whisperers and this and that, yada yada yada. They had a substantial amount of success on the tour, and Charlie Wee, I think, is the guy that came up with the name Stack and Tilt. Okay, so now they branded it, right? Because in reality, if it didn't have a name, right, everybody would probably. But what it did was it created a target, a direct target. You follow me? So.
Yeah, I do.
And if you're successful, and if you're being successful, just get ready, because the arrows are going to come your way, and that's just the nature of the beast.
I see. No one's taken more bullets over the years than Andy himself, and he's still standing, and the system's as strong as ever. And the name, just to clarify on that, my understanding of that story, which I've spoken with Andy and Mike about that over the years. My understanding of that story, which isn't firsthand. You're getting this secondhand from me, but it was Golf Digest who insisted that it was named something because it was such a comprehensive article in the Golf Digest magazine back in 2007. They wanted it to be called something, and so there was a few different names bandied about. You might be right when saying that Charlie Wee was the one who kind of finalized that. I don't know if that's true, but it was Golf Digest who insisted that there was a name. And I also think that giving it a name like dilutes it in the sense that it's not a person. Like, you're not attacking Butch Harmon, or you're not attacking David Ledbetter, or you're not attacking Sean Foley, or any individual golf instructor directly, even though it's indirectly you are. But because it's a name, it's a brand, it's a little bit easier for people to attack, I think.
I think that's so all of a sudden the video comes out. Both Mike and Andy have these, they're leading left, they're doing this, and they have a sort of finish, which sort of finish, if you studied more, I usually, sort of finish, and they come in from there too, but then they get branded as method teachers, right? Meanwhile,
yes,
they were the first to market. They were the original disruptors. I had made a small video about that. Where
I saw it. I saw it with Andreas. Yeah,
they were the first guys to go to. They went on Charlie Rose and said, "This is wrong." So the industry as a whole might have, some people might have not taken it so lightly, but they were right. In the end, they were right, and
yes,
they have a lot to offer, in my opinion. Yeah.
Well, you're not going to get any argument from me on that. I completely agree with you. I think they've done more for golf instruction in the last decade or so than anybody. And that's not to say other people haven't moved the needle as well, but Andy Plummer is the smartest mind in golf instruction by some distance in my mind, and he's had that title put upon him by others, high caliber golf instructors as well. There's a lot of people who spent time with Andy. In fact, I would say most people who've spent time with Andy would understand why people would make that statement about him. So I'm extremely grateful for the introduction all those years ago via James Ridyard. Extremely grateful for the friendship and mentorship that Andy and Mike have bestowed upon me over the last 15 years, and just going to keep trying to pay it forward and share. Helping younger coaches is something that I'm passionate about now as well. In a previous role I had in Singapore, I had 23 golf coaches working underneath my instruction. I've got a similar sort of setup now here in London, and I'm keen to help share information that I think will improve the quality of golf lessons in general, because I still think there's a long way to go there.
I agree with you. And now, just going back to Bennett and Plummer, they've persevered because they've been literally nuked from every angle, and they stuck by. They still. Andy Plummer sticks by his guns, and he says, "This is," and a lot of these good coaches are my friends, and I kind of take what they say seriously, and their accomplishments speak for them, not just so much the banter on the internet, but they've actually accomplished things, and they have DP World Tour players, PGA Tour players, and people that come to them, and they basically tell me, "Hey, look, I spent this amount of time with Andy Plummer," and Andreas Cowley said it. He said, the guy took 15 minutes. It should only take 10 minutes to straighten this out, right? So if you know where to look and what you're trying to accomplish, I guess it makes it all that more easy. It makes it a lot easier than just playing a guessing game, right? So the model does play.
Yeah. I think Andreas is having a tremendous amount of success with his players in Denmark, and he's I'd call Andreas a good friend. We were together in Austria a couple of months ago, just before Christmas, and I actually remember asking, when I was in Portugal, I invited Andreas back in 2016, so nearly 10 years ago. I invited him out to speak at a kind of small gathering of golf instructors that I organized back then. Andreas's work has been phenomenal, and his work with juniors and tour players, and having his results speak for themselves. And as he's communicated to you, and as he's doing so now through his coach education program, he's paying it forward and sharing more of this. Is the Stack and Tilt foundations are there for everybody to see, and for him, he clearly credits a lot of what his success to that as well. And I think that's important. I think you should share and give credit where credit's due. It's just a decent thing to do, really.
And more importantly, if you look at Andreas's players, they look alike. That stroke pattern does not look like Bennett and Plummer, right? They have a little float load at the top,
Yeah.
and it's but he credits that to Stack and Tilt, right? So it's not like we're going to be cookie cutters, right? We don't. You're not going to walk away with a cookie cutter swing and this mold, and this is what it is, and that's what you're gonna be the gingerbread man, and so is he, and so is she, and so that's not what's happening, right? Yet that's what was being portrayed. That was what was being portrayed, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, it was. And then, in some instances, it still is the criticism that's thrown at Stack and Tilt. I would ask anybody listening to this who's slightly interested in learning more about Stack and Tilt, or they've heard about it, but they don't really know what it is. If they took one thing away from this webinar, this podcast, it's not one swing. It's not one swing. It's a system for golf built around a three-dimensional description of the swing. That three-dimensional description was written in the book over 15 years ago. It still stands true today. There's not anybody in the industry, at least I don't think there's anybody now, arguing that the spine moves in three planes of motion: extension, tilt, and turn. Andy and Mike wrote that out clearly in the book, and they were the first to do so. That's true. That information is true. How you apply that information, whether your preference is a centered shoulder turn or a centered pivot in the backswing with no shift, is up to you. That's your preference. Golf swings can work in different ways. That doesn't mean there aren't any rules, but you can have a preference for your players to move off the board if that's what you want, but write down the shot pattern that swing would produce. That's what nobody's really doing. Nobody's putting pen to paper and writing out their shot pattern and their swing model in their mind, because it opens them up to criticism. You're quite right what you said earlier. The minute, one of Andy's favorite sayings, and I've heard this a lot recently, everyone's your friend until you put pen to paper, or you start drawing lines. Everybody's your friend until you start putting it down on paper. And of course there's loads of ways to swing, but why don't you write down just one of them? Why don't you write down one of them? Nobody's actually writing down anything in terms of what would work as a model. And without a model, a clear model, your decision making could be very fragmented. It could be all over the place. And that's my experience of my own coaching before I had a model. And it's certainly my experience of watching students come through my lesson tee, and the online lessons that I teach. That's what I'm seeing communicated: a fragmented system of instruction that changes week to week.
So, in the 10 or so years gone by, how do you feel your success rate? Now, granted, I'm not sure, because I know you were in Singapore, and I don't know how that was, how. But if you were to take, your serious students, the more dedicated students, not the casual weekend golfers that are, but how would you say your success rate has been? Or in other words, your sense of accomplishment, or their sense of accomplishment, with using I mean, they're tangible, right? They're measurable, more or less.
It would depend how you would define that success, whether I think they did better or whether they think they did better, and what better looked like for them. Was it just hitting the ball better? Was it making their swing look prettier? Or was it scoring lower? I mean, golfers come to us for lots of different reasons. I would say that I do feel my decision making has sharpened over the years. That isn't to say I get I don't walk out of every lesson thinking I did a wonderful job. Sometimes I can still look back and say, maybe I could have communicated that piece differently, or I'm constantly looking at the structure of the lesson and just trying to get the feedback internally as to whether I did a good job. I don't know how you measure that exactly in terms of someone's success in a single lesson, but I think I've had players working with me for multiple years, improving their handicaps continuously. So that's a reasonable. I think that's a reasonable metric that you could apply. But you also don't know about the people who stopped coming because they didn't feel like they were making progress, and then they go somewhere else. So I'm not. I'm not.
I'm not trying to put you on the
My
spot
ego.
in terms of that, because in the end, the satisfaction, you would have to gauge if you're satisfied with the information you've provided and whether it's useful. In the end, everybody's different and everybody has a different agenda, right? So
I think it's helped what I would say to you that I believe to be true is it's really helped my lesson structure and decision making and problem solving. There's a much clearer road to which see the problem, make the decision about what to do based on my understanding of how the system works and the swing works, and then making that recommendation. I think that process has become sharper and more streamlined over the years, which is part product of a great system that I'm using to teach and part product of sharpening my sword over the years in the trenches. The more you do something, hopefully the better you get at it anyway.
Now, the system contains biomechanical components, right? And, the ball flights, right? So a combination of the two should be able to get you some kind of clarity as if to prove that what you're saying is actually occurring, right?
That's right. I mean, if you have, the ball flight, I'm glad you said that. Because that's missing from an awful lot of other things out there. The ball flight is not even discussed. They discuss movement. They measure things that I don't even know why they measure some of them,
measurable.
But they measure.
Is it necessary? That's the question. Is it necessary? Are you measuring because it's necessary, or are you measuring because it's measurable? I don't know.
One of my friends shared a comment, a sentence a couple of weeks back on this, and it just stuck with me. Just because you can measure something doesn't make it important. And I do feel like the industry in the last few years has gone down that road in a large way. And again, it speaks to the fact that there isn't this foundation for a decent swing system in the first place. People are crying out for something to teach, and you see that on the web. To your point about content creation, there's all these different kind of try this, try that. The pin your arm against the chest and spin open. The pressure shift from P1 to P2. The moving off the ball. Now that's the magic movement that makes everybody great. Or spiking the ground reaction forces. Measuring how these people are pushing into the ground. And nobody is talking about what that does to the ball or how you would apply it. That's the bit that gets completely lost. The information, we've never had more information. I can measure 3D. I can put dots on my body and measure 3D. I can stand on force plates and measure force plates. I can put a hack motion wrist sensor on my wrist and measure my wrist. I can measure the ball flight with TrackMan. I can measure the club data and the delivery with TrackMan. I can measure basically everything. And we've got more data than we've ever had, but it's the application of that which requires a system to be able to plug all that into a deterministic model that you could use in your mind to go, okay, I've got all this information. How do I influence the ball flight based on all of this information? Where do I go first? What's the biggest deficiency? Where do I start? How do I begin to repair this swing, which is clearly not functioning based on the golfer's feedback? Where is it deficient and where do I start? That is, it seems so obvious when you say it. I think that seems an obvious thing that should be discussed, but I think that gets skipped past and people are just, measuring. I measured in 3D. I've got golfers who move 5 inches off the ball, and I've got golfers who move 3 inches off the ball, and I've got golfers who move 7 inches off the ball. Well, that's just
Right.
information. Like, what do you do with that information? What if you're teaching a beginner? Do you teach them to move 3 inches off the ball, or do you teach them to move 7?
Right.
Which one is it? And why would you make that decision? Or would you not choose 3 or 7? Would you choose a different number altogether? These are the questions that when you put them to these people, they don't have an answer. All they'll tell you is that their tour database has these parameters that people move within. And I think, of course, golfers can move within certain parameters. There's averages and then there's ranges, but it's the application of that information. If Mrs. Smith walked onto your lesson tee tomorrow and her thoracic sway was 5 inches off the ball at P4 and she's topping the ball, what decision do you make? Or if it's 3 inches off the ball at P4 and she's flushing the ball, do you change that? I mean, it's just information at the end of the day. It's very easy to measure. It's not quite so easy to apply that information in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and that's exactly it with this information overload, right? The ability to measure so many things and quantify so many different things. How do you decide what's relevant? Uh,
Some of the videos that pop up on my feed it just make me cry. Like people bouncing around, like jumping around up and down and spinning themselves in the air like a spinning top, like they're trying to do some sort of ice skating like move, like some pirouette in the air. It's it makes me I just don't see the benefit of that. And if that's me blind to this enormous benefit of jumping around in the air and pirouetting, then you know I'd like someone to prove that I'm wrong on that, because I just don't see that. I don't see the value. Most of us, again, it kind of depends, I guess, on where you're focusing your attention and teaching. When most of us are working with regular golfers, and there is I use the same system whether I'm teaching a tour player or a beginner, but there are things you can ask a more talented golfer to do, a more athletic person to do. There are things that they can do that mere mortals can't do. That's I think that's a fair statement. You could get some of these tour players to do things that mere mortals just wouldn't be able to perform. So it comes down to results on the lesson tee at the end of the day. And if you're doing well, people, I guess, will come back, and that's great. If you're doing a good job, then keep doing it, and your student list will reflect that, and people will say nice things about you, and then that's good. But the current trend of over measuring, I feel, is definitely not helping move the industry forward.
Well, I mean, the trend of over measuring, the trend that started a few years back where it became more scientific and golf pros drifted into this area of being biomechanists and scientists and all that stuff. But there's a certain amount, I guess, that makes you a competent professional, is understanding it at the same time, how to apply it from your end. But, to get over theoretical as if you were writing a PhD thesis on something or trying to discover something that, you know what I mean? Trying to discover something in the golf swing or micro quantify something that, it's just, I mean, how long does it take to swing a golf club? A second? I don't know, right? Top to bottom,
Not very long.
within that, right? You
We
can
could
measure
measure
it,
it.
but here's the thing:
We could measure it.
I find that the less I think about, the better I hit the ball. Right? I may take some continuum And you know,
That comes down to just performance at the end of the day. Once you get enough of a swing into the system, into your system, then there's a performance element that you can do better by thinking less. I can definitely attest to that. That exists. But if you're going to change the technique, that requires some conscious work to do that, and you do that based on a deficiency that you saw in the
right.
fundamentals. The fundamentals that
Well,
I teach
so
by.
if you got somebody started, so what I like about the stack and tilt system is that it's going to teach the person to be able to self-diagnose certain things. You know what I mean? Whereas I think in some other arenas, and you might call them, it's about creating a level of codependency where it's a
Yeah,
repetitive. I mean, I'm in Dominican Republic, so but in the bigger picture,
it is
in
what
the
it is.
real world, I was talking to a gentleman named Rafael Machado yesterday from Venezuela. He's in Panama, and he's a author. Yeah, yeah,
I know
good guy,
Rafa
good
very
guy.
well. Yeah,
And he
Rafa's a
was
good
saying,
friend of mine. Yeah,
it's just my
great
job to
guy.
teach them how to learn, learn what's going on. So I said, yeah, because the most important thing is being able to communicate so that they understand what you're trying to get through to them. And in a sense, get it, get golf thinking to the point where, you can become quasi independent and play golf. I think that's the ultimate goal, is to enjoy the
Yeah,
game, whether you're trying to score better or, and that's, I think, but
I agree. I think it shouldn't be. Hopefully, you can learn golf in a way that you retain what you learn, and you can come back to the same place, even if you don't pick up your clubs for a week or two, or even a month or two, and that you don't start from ground zero every time you stand over a ball and have to hit 20 or 50 shots before you find your swing. And I think that's part of the education that I like to try and convey to students, and show them that there's a reason they hit bad shots. Bad shots are predictable, or they're diagnosable. You can see them. They're not by accident. And equally, good shots are not by accident. You can design them, and you can see how they became good shots. So the idea that golf should just be a random, you know, toss of a coin or roll of a dice every time you make a pass at the ball, it doesn't exist in my mind. At least that's not how it has to be. I'm not saying it can't. Lots of people play golf like that, right? Lots of people stand over the ball and just hope they make contact, or they just hope it goes straight. But there's more to it than that. You can design. It is designable. It's not by accident.
yeah,
It's not
good
by
golf is
accident.
pretty boring, you know. Dramatic golf isn't,
Right.
to me, that's
It's so difficult to be good just from a swing perspective, just to like have it on lockdown. You only have to look obviously at the best players on the planet. They don't hit it where they want to every
right.
single time. That's for sure. It's an extremely challenging game, and I like to try and make it less lower the barrier to entry and lower the barrier to improvement as well. Like Andreas said to you a couple of weeks back when you spoke to him, you should see, if you use the right pieces, you should see an uptake fairly quickly in contact or control of the curve or the direction of the ball, depending on someone's deficiency. You should see it pretty quick, and that, I think, is that's the proof and the evidence that you need to show a student. And if you show them that, then they're probably going to listen to you and follow along a little bit more than they would do if you tell them to do something and they still top the next 10
Yeah.
balls. That's pretty demoralizing. So yeah, I think you should help people quickly, and if the system is solid and robust, you can. There's other ways people choose to teach, and I'm okay with that. Like, the idea that we get branded with this one swing thing, as I said, is just, it's just not how it works. There's an approach to this that's softer than that. But I think what Stack and Tilt really did, and helps me with, is identifying a golfer's deficiency using the three fundamental tasks that they highlight as being truly fundamental, as opposed to like the old fundamentals where grips are variable and they're static. They're static as well. I think it's an interesting discussion just to have with someone about, I could grab somebody off the street and I could pull them into my studio, and within a couple of minutes, I could get them to stand at setup and make them look like a golfer. I could show them how to hold the club and just put them in front of a golf ball. I could bring a group of people into that room and ask what this person's handicap is, and they would guess a range of different numbers because they have no evidence, they have no real information to go on. Okay, this person looks like they're standing okay, but you don't know anything about them as a golfer. It's a complete stab in the dark. They could be a tournament professional or they could be a beginner. If you ask someone, if you scratch a line on the ground, on the grass, if you paint a white line on the grass and you put 10 balls, or you don't even have to put 10 balls on the line, to be honest, you could have no balls. Ask someone to put the club on the line and make a swing. And on those 10 swings, look at where the club hits the line, or look at where the club hits the ground relative to the line. That would give you an indication, a pretty strong indication of a golfer's skill level. And you've probably seen the Mike Bennett video where he hits the ball 17 times in a row. I'm not sure if you've seen that over the years. Been doing
2.0
the
and
rounds for
1.0.
many, many years.
Thanks to Nick Clearwater.
That's a dynamic skill, and it's a fundamental that is demonstrated more consistently by good players, and the extent to which poor players fail that task is greater the higher their handicap. So the highest handicap would miss the ground a lot of the time, or if they did hit the ground, they'd hit it behind the line, and they'd hit it with the widest dispersion behind the line. They might hit 1 inch behind the line, and then the next one they might hit 5 inches behind the line, and then they might hit 3 inches behind the line. If you're a 10 handicap, you probably hit the ground every single time, and the dispersion of your low point might be somewhere from maybe 1 inch behind the line to 1 inch in front of the line. So you're kind of getting closer to solid contact. And if you're a tour player, you'd have the thing on the tightest dispersion, and it would always be the low point of the swing would always be target side of the line. So I think that's an everybody thing. It's hard to categorize that as a stack and tilt thing. It's a stack and tilt fundamental that we use to diagnose people's swings and how deficient or successful those swings are. But everybody could use that framework, because that's a dynamic skill that every golfer, if you consider the function of the golf swing, the first thing it has to do is make consistent contact. So that's why so many people actually do well with trying stack and tilt. I put that in sort of air quotation marks. That can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But I think when people tell me that they've tried it, what they really have tried most of the time is they've just put their weight on their front leg, and they've tried to, and doing so will influence the location of that low point. And for some golfers, it will influence it enough to move it far enough forward that they now hit the ball first and the ground second. And that's something they've never done before. So there's the uptake in their performance immediately. And that then leads to the question, well, if everyone's got their weight on their front foot when they hit the ball and make contact, how would you choose to move it throughout the rest of the swing? And that's up for debate. We can discuss that. I know what I would do, and I'd be able to communicate it clearly with a student as to my preference, but other people would undoubtedly choose to do it differently. But I think if you come at it from the perspective that you want to control the low point, and that's an important skill to control, then it helps frame your decision making and tunnel your decision making in a particular direction. You're making a decision because you're trying to influence the quality and the consistency of the low point, the quality and the consistency of the contact. So that's part of why I think the system is very robust and helps a lot of people very quickly.
I saw watching Bryson DeChambeau's on there. Has a pretty popular channel. Yeah, and then,
he's doing great.
So Brandel Chambly claims that Bryson was doing golfing machine. I'm like, what? Everybody's doing golfing machines. Just a catalog of components. And one, he gets like a raw beginner. He takes his club, takes him into a sand bunker, tracks that line Ben Doyle used to, gave credit Ben Doyle with that, and said, "I want you to swing at this
Yeah.
line, and then we'll make some decisions afterwards." So it's a, the fact that Bennett and Plummer came back with these three fundamentals that are real fundamentals, and they're quantifiable, and they're actually
Yeah.
valid, and I think that was
I would
one of the
agree.
great
I
one of
would
their
agree.
great contributions to the game was that, and the fact that they were willing to go
Mm.
public and say, hey, these ball flight laws have been screwed up for decades, and so
Yeah.
they've made their mark in golf instruction history, and kudos to them. Yeah,
Yeah.
I made my watching you guys, and so I got a mat out there, and I grabbed some liquid chalk, and I made the grid. So I'm still trying to work it
Hmm.
out to see what's going to happen. But so when you make that grid, now I'm just gonna get up and get cool.
Yeah.
When you make the grid and you look down, so the inner line should be a hand path, right? So when you look down,
Hmm.
should you see your hand path on that line, or is that just a arbitrary reference? Or you understand what I'm saying? You you know
Yeah.
the aim
I
point, the
mean,
aim point
yes. If
concept
it was
in golf machine. Well, not aim
aim point,
point,
yep.
putter,
Yeah. I
right?
searched.
So you get the yeah,
Yep.
So I'm wondering if that's like I should be able to see my hands tracing that, or
Yeah. I mean, the way the grid's set up, the grid that most people see, yeah, that grid is set up um, in front of the golfer in the sense that it's really just mapping out how the club moves from P1 to P3, where the left arm's parallel with the ground. It doesn't really get into too much of the stuff that goes on behind that. There is a more expansive grid that doesn't often get shown, but that does exist.
right,
The sticks on the ground are a two-dimensional reference for the three-dimensional
fun,
hand path and club path in space. So you could pick up those sticks and hold them in the air, and you certainly will see some instructors doing that when they teach to try and guide the hand path either on the backswing, the downswing, or the follow through. They'll try to give that some boundaries to conform to, which I think has been an extremely valuable part of, first of all, understanding that geometry, but then being able to apply it on the lesson tee and show somebody how you can change their path and their delivery of the club by understanding that there's these constraints in space. Much like you would stay within the lines of the highway, right? You're driving down the highway and you've got these lines either side of your car, and if you veer too far off, you're going to be in trouble, right? You're going to crash. And the lines help to keep you in play. They're not a physical barrier as such, although the hard shoulder or the kind of the central reservation is a physical barrier. But you're trying to conform to this. There's a space within which you're allowed to be, and just as much as there is with the car, you can be a little bit off, but as long as you stay more or less within those lines, you're going to be okay. And I would liken the grid and the concept of that swing to that. There's boundaries in space that golfers shouldn't really be going, and you can use the grid and you can elevate the grid into the air to build constraints that golfers have to conform to. That might be a little bit like when you learn to ride a bike in the UK. We call them stabilizers. I think in the
training wheels,
US you
yeah,
call them training wheels.
okay,
Yeah, we call them stabilizers. But you use your stabilizers, you use your training wheels to keep you within the realms of balance, and then once you learn the space within which you're allowed to be, you take them off. It's similar. I use that analogy a little bit with students just to help them understand that there are rules. You can't just swing this thing around you however you want to. And the grids a very, very valuable tool as a teacher. But I think also I show it to a lot of my students, and they appreciate the detail and the clarity that it gives them. One thing, again, Andy's taught me too many things over the years, but one other thing I remember him saying one year was that it just made me realize. He said, look, when golfers look down at the ball, all they see is grass. He made that statement, and it stuck with me because it's like, you know what, as a whatever, a decent ball strike. I can hit the ball. I'm a professional golfer. I can hit the golf ball. Ball being on the ground isn't a scary concept for me. I don't need to really think about it. I'm going to make contact with this thing. So I'm not worried about looking down at the ball and where my arms and club go in space. But you think about trying to put yourself in the shoes of a student of varying abilities, but let's just say, they're not an accomplished golfer. They're still quite an erratic golfer. They look down at the ball and they've got no real guidance or roadmap for where to go. And so just having those lines scratched on the ground where they can visualize the club and the hand moving around them on both sides of the swing, I know that people have found that valuable. And then how you build the ball position into that diagram and how you configure the face, you can you can build in the shot you want to hit. You build a draw or you can build a fade. You can do all of those things. So you can show somebody how to set up and give themselves the best chance of hitting the shot that they want to. Once again, it comes down to this isn't by accident. We're trying to design these shots, design the swing to hit the shot that the student wants to hit.
Yeah, so I agree with all that stuff. I was just curious if that was what we were taught about tracing a straight plane line, or you get the two flashlights, or you put a laser on the butt end of the club or something like that. So I was trying to get obviously it's a path. It's three balls, right, and then there's the geometry connected with the direction you're going to start and the amount of curvature. So I like all that stuff. I mean, I just never.
Yeah, it's another one of those things, Ralph, where you put pen to paper and you design a shot. It's not the only shot you could hit, but it's a shot that you could predict. And it's as you say, it's a straight swing direction model where the bottom of the arc is tracing the target line, and the outward path comes from the ball being struck on the backside of the arc. So you're hitting before the tangent. That's the down. That's the out. And you put the face into that diagram and you can predict a push draw while swinging at the target. That's the model. That's the stack and tilt template. That's the shot you would design from the beginning. But if you wanted to hit a fade, a push fade or a pull fade, you wanted to put it further back on the arc and have a more rightward path, you wanted to put it further forward on the arc and have a less rightward path or a leftward path, you could do anything. And that's the irony, I think, and it's still the biggest thing that's missed. It's like you guys use one swing, and I think it's the opposite. Because you can see how to configure all of those different shots. You could teach anyone to hit any shot you wanted to: high, low, start right, curve to the right, start right, curve to the left, start left, curve to the right, start left, curve to the left. All of those shots are trainable, teachable, predictable, and you can build them in at setup using the grid. So it's a very powerful diagram. And again, I think that's one of Andy's one of the many things he's done for the industry. That legacy hopefully will live well beyond him, and I hope it becomes more mainstream in terms of golf instruction, because I think it would help golf teachers globally. I don't think anyone wouldn't benefit from understanding that stuff in a bit more detail.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're spot on in that. I would say 90% of handicapped golfers covet a push draw, yet they don't understand how to do it. And now they have clear definition of what needs to happen in order for that, because again, it would be that.
There's people who go on. No. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. There's people who think you have to roll your wrists to hit a draw.
I said,
I mean,
he's starting at the flag, flipping, and the ball's going around, and it's who knows where on the left side there.
It's 2025, and there's people who still think you have to roll your wrist to hit a draw. And that's not just the golf in public. I can understand why the golf in public might think that, because that message has been portrayed for all too long, back from the days when we didn't know better. But from a coaching perspective, we should know better by now.
All right, Rob. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add that we might have didn't touch on?
Honestly, I'm pretty good. I enjoyed talking to you. It's nice to chew the fat and speak about, give the Stack and Tilt platform, give Stack and Tilt a bit of a platform, and feel like I can communicate some of the things that get lost in Instagram messages or Facebook comments. You can't really convey things fully. So if anybody's, interested in learning more about it and have questions, they can find me on social. Um, and I'd be happy to help. That's definitely my nature, to help. And so yeah, be more than happy if anyone had any messages, they
Yeah,
could feel free
I'm
to
going to
reach out.
post your socials when this goes up to YouTube, and I mean, you're readily available. It's really been a pleasure talking to you. I'm really glad you were really thankful that you gave me your time, and it was very enjoyable and very informative. Again, I think you have one of the most
Thanks.
eloquent and well organized YouTube channels, and it's fun to watch. You know,
I appreciate that. I'm gonna keep going. That's the plan. And yeah, just keep trying to spread some good information out there. And the nicest part of that entire exercise is the YouTube comments and the feedback from people. When you don't even know these people, you don't get to see them, and they benefit and they improve their golf via the videos. So that's very rewarding and satisfying. So I'm happy if I'm doing a very, very, very small part of paying it forward and sharing some good information to the golfing masses, because I think that's really
yes,
what it's
I
about.
agree, and yeah, that small contribution is some unknown person who could be anywhere, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you don't know what yeah, you never know who's watching. That's one of the most amazing things now about the world we live in, the internet, and the fact that you
Right.
and I are speaking from halfway across the world. And yeah, just people's the accessibility that they have now to us across the world, where that would never have been possible before. Um, it never ever ceases to blow my mind where I get messages from people living all over the world watching the channel, and very humble and grateful and thankful that I'm having, like I say, a tiny little influence on their life, but for them it might be quite a big one, and I'm grateful for that and happy to help.
Okay,
Happy to
Rob. Well,
help.
it's been a pleasure, and thanks again for stopping by and checking in with us, and we appreciate it.
Very welcome, Ralph. Thanks for
All
having
right.
me.